You know that specific moment when you step into your own house and it suddenly does not feel like yours anymore? That was me standing in the doorway, staring at my husband on the couch like he had been waiting to fire me from my own life. Then I saw a manila envelope with my name on it and a phone propped up on a bookshelf that was already recording everything. My name is Lucy Fox. I wish I could tell you that I sensed the disaster waiting for me behind the oak door of my suburban colonial. But the truth is far more mundane. I was just tired. It was nearly 9 at night, and my feet were throbbing in heels that had felt sensible at 8 in the morning, but now felt like torture devices. I turned the key in the lock, expecting the usual sounds of our Tuesday routine, maybe the hum of the television, maybe the rhythmic thud of the dishwasher. What I found instead was a silence so thick it felt pressurized. I stepped into the hallway and dropped my keys in the ceramic bowl. The clatter echoed too loudly. When I walked into the living room, the air smelled stale, heavy with the scent of hops and male sweat. My husband, Evan Carter, was sitting on the beige sectional. He was not alone. Sitting around him were 4 men I knew, though I hesitated to call them friends. They were his old crew, the ones who had been there before me and, apparently, intended to be there after me. Grant Rourke was leaning back in my favorite armchair, his boots resting on the coffee table right next to a condensation-slicked bottle of beer. Miles Pennington was perched on the arm of the sofa, looking at his fingernails with a bored detachment. 2 others, whose names always slipped my mind because they rarely spoke unless it was to echo Evan, occupied the love seat. They had their shoes off. That was the first thing that actually registered as an insult. There was a pile of loafers and sneakers by the entryway rug, dumped there with a casual arrogance that suggested they owned the floorboards. Evan looked up. He did not look guilty. He did not look sad. He smiled, a wide and unsettling expression that belonged at a high school reunion. Not a Tuesday night ambush. "Hey, Lucy," he said. His voice was bright, too bright. I stood frozen, clutching my purse strap with both hands. What is going on? Is everything okay? Evan exchanged a look with Grant. It was a look of shared knowledge, a signal passed between teammates before a play. Evan cleared his throat and leaned forward, clasping his hands between his knees. "We have decided it is time to divorce you." The sentence hung in the air, absurd and violent. I blinked, trying to process the syntax. He had not said I want a divorce. He had not said, "We need to talk." He had said, "We have decided." As if I were a faltering stock option or a redundant employee they had voted off the board during a meeting I had not been invited to. "Excuse me?" I whispered. Grant Rourke moved before Evan could answer. Grant was the alpha of this little pack, a man who wore suits that were too shiny and cologne that lingered in rooms long after he left. He reached down and slid a thick manila folder across the coffee table toward me. It skidded across the glass surface and stopped inches from my toes. "It is all in there," Grant said. His voice was rough, devoid of any sympathy. "Settlement terms are already highlighted. We wanted to make this as easy as possible for you." I looked at the folder. A yellow sticky note flagged the signature page. It was already tabbed. It was already done. Miles Pennington finally looked up from his fingernails. He stared at me with a flat, cold expression, as if I were a stain on the upholstery he was eager to see removed. "This is better for everyone. Lucy, really. You should just accept it." My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic bird trapped in a cage. I looked at Evan, searching for the man I had woken up next to that morning. The man who had kissed my cheek and asked if I needed coffee. That man was gone. In his place was a stranger wearing my husband's face, watching me with a predatory focus. "Why are they here?" "Evan?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to steady it. Evan sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience. "I told you she would get emotional," he said to the room. Then I saw it, on the bookshelf to my right. Nestled between a row of hardcovers and a decorative vase was a smartphone. It was propped up carefully. The camera lens pointed directly at the center of the room, directly at me. A small red counter on the screen was ticking upward. You are recording this, I said. The realization washed over me like ice water. This was not a conversation. This was a production. Evan stood up then. He smoothed the front of his shirt. You have been unstable for a long time. Lucy, you are ungrateful. You are bad for my future. The words sounded stiff. They sounded rehearsed. He was reciting a script, hitting keywords that I suspected would look very bad on a transcript, but sounded reasonable if delivered with a calm, sad demeanor. He was playing the role of the long-suffering husband, and his friends were the Greek chorus, nodding in solemn agreement. I stepped forward, ignoring the folder, and looked at the phone again. Then I looked at the papers. I needed to see what they were so desperate for me to sign. I reached down and flipped the folder open. The text was dense, standard legal jargon, but my eyes snagged on a page labeled Debt Allocation. I froze. There were numbers listed next to my name, large numbers. Credit line ending in 402, $45,000. Personal loan ending in 881, $32,000. Business liability transfer, $110,000. I stared at the figures. I did not have a credit line ending in 402. I had never taken out a personal loan for $32,000, and I certainly had no business liability. What is this? I asked, pointing at the page. My finger shook. These aren't my debts. Evan stepped closer, encroaching on my personal space. The smell of beer on his breath was overpowering now. It is your debt. Lucy, you spent it. You are bad with money. We all know it. He gestured to the men around the room. They nodded. She was always buying things she didn't need. Miles muttered. That is a lie, I said, my voice rising. Evan cut me off. His face hardened, the fake smile vanishing. You have one choice. Lucy, you can sign this tonight. Right now. Like an adult. We settle this cleanly. Or you can fight me. And if you fight me, we will make it ugly in court. We will air every single piece of dirty laundry you have ever had. I looked at him. I looked at Grant, who was smirking now, tapping his fingers on his knee. I looked at the phone, still recording my reaction. They wanted me to scream. They wanted me to throw something. They wanted the unstable wife to make an appearance for the camera. I took a deep breath. I forced my hands to relax. I forced my face into a mask of absolute calm. I would not give them the footage they wanted, if this is so fair. I asked quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. Why do you need an audience? The room went silent for a beat. Evan blinked, thrown off by my lack of hysteria. But Grant Rourke did not blink. He just widened his grin, leaning forward like a wolf who had just cornered a rabbit. Because witnesses matter. Lucy, Grant said, and in that moment, the final piece clicked into place. They were not here to support their friend through a difficult emotional transition. They were not here to help move boxes. They were here to corroborate a lie. They were here to nod and swear under oath that I was crazy, that I was volatile, and that I had agreed to this theft of my life. They were not here to watch a divorce. They were here to help him win one. To understand how a man brings an audience to his own divorce, you have to understand the man he pretended to be 6 years ago, before the ambush in the living room and before the recording device on the bookshelf. Evan Carter was not a villain. He was the kind of man who felt like a winning lottery ticket. We met at a fundraiser I was coordinating for Harbor Light Civic Events. It was one of those humid July evenings where the air conditioning in the rented hall was failing, and the ice sculptures were sweating faster than the donors. I was 26 years old, holding a clipboard like a shield, trying to salvage a silent auction that had gone off the rails. Evan appeared at my elbow with 2 glasses of cheap white wine and a smile that made the chaotic room go quiet. He was charming. He was ambitious in that starving, desperate way that looks like passion when you are young. He told me he was going to build something that lasted. And looking at the intensity in his eyes, I believed him. But even then, he was not alone. Wherever Evan went, the Garage Brothers followed. That was what they called themselves. A joke that had started in college and calcified into an identity. Grant, Miles, and the others were his chorus, his counsel, and his shadow. In the beginning, I thought it was sweet. I thought it showed loyalty. I liked that he had a tribe because I had always been a bit of a lone wolf. I was an event planner, which meant my life was about logistics, contingencies, and solving problems before anyone else noticed them. Evan loved that about me. He used to watch me organize a dinner party or navigate a complex family schedule and say that I could handle anything. He made my competence feel like a superpower rather than a chore. Our life together built itself with a rhythm that felt seductive in its normalcy. We bought a starter home with a porch that needed painting. We merged our savings accounts into one pot. We hosted weekend barbecues where I grilled vegetables, and Evan stood by the cooler with the boys, laughing at jokes I could not hear. It looked perfect on paper. We were checking all the boxes of the American dream, moving steadily toward a future that seemed guaranteed. However, there was always the project. Evan never called it a job. He called it the big break. He and the boys were building an entity, a limited liability company that was going to disrupt the local real estate market. The details were always vague. Whenever I asked how the business model actually worked, Evan would wave a hand and tell me not to bore myself with the dry mechanics. He said they were handling the heavy lifting so I would never have to worry. That was how the paperwork started. It was never a formal sit-down meeting. It was always casual. Usually when I was rushing out the door for work or tired after a long day at Harbor Light, Evan would slide a document across the kitchen island, right next to my coffee mug. "I just need you to initial this," he would say, biting into toast. "It is just to speed things up with the bank. Standard stuff." I would glance at the pages. They were dense walls of text about assets and guarantors. "Do I need to read this?" I would ask. He would laugh, a warm, easy sound. "You can if you want to fall asleep. It is just routine. Lucy, I trust you more than anyone. Do you trust me?" And of course, I trusted him. He was my husband. We shared a bed and a life, so I signed. I signed my name on lines I did not understand, authorizing things I did not read, because I thought marriage meant you did not have to read the fine print. I thought our partnership was a shield. I did not realize I was signing away my safety, page by casual page. The friends, the Garage Brothers, watched all of this happen. Over the years, I started to notice a shift in how they treated me. In the beginning, they were loud and welcoming, but as the business grew and the paperwork piled up, they became polite in a way that felt like a wall. I was the mascot. I was the nice wife who made the potato salad and kept the house clean while the men did the real work. If I walked into a room where they were talking, the conversation would stutter and die. Grant would offer me a tight smile and make a backhanded joke about how lucky Evan was to have a wife who did not ask too many questions. Miles would look through me, as if I were a piece of furniture that had been placed inconveniently in the walkway. They never included me in the real conversations. They only included me when they needed a signature. My best friend, Tessa Lane, saw it before I did. Tessa was sharp, the kind of woman who read contracts for fun and did not believe in unconditional anything. One afternoon, over coffee, I complained that Evan's friends were acting secretive. "They do not act like friends." "Lucy," Tessa had said, putting her cup down with a sharp click, "they act like a board of directors. And you are not on the board. You are just the asset they are managing." I told her she was being cynical. I told her that guys were just like that they had their own language. I defended them because when you love someone, you will call control closeness if it buys you a little bit of peace. I wanted to believe that the secrecy was just protectiveness. I wanted to believe that Evan was keeping the stress of the business away from me because he cared. Not because he was hiding something, but the first real crack in the foundation appeared about 6 months before the ambush in the living room. It was a subtle shift in Evan's language. We were arguing about where to go for our anniversary. I wanted to go to the coast for a quiet weekend. Evan wanted to stay in town because the guys were planning a golf outing. We decided it is not a good time for a trip. Evan said, "I stopped folding laundry." "Who is we?" Evan looked confused. "Me? I meant me. We, us, our budget." But he had not meant us. He had slipped. He had started speaking in the plural. But I was not the other half of that plural anymore. The we he was referring to was him and the Garage brothers. It was the first time I felt it, the sensation that my marriage was crowded. It felt as if there were 5 people in my bed, 5 people checking my bank account, and 5 people deciding my future. I brushed it off then. I told myself it was just a slip of the tongue. But looking back now, from the wreckage of my living room, I realized that was the moment I should have run. That was the moment the committee took over. Evan had stopped being a husband and had started being the front man for a group project that required my destruction to succeed. And I, the fool who could handle anything, had handled my own downfall by signing my name every time he asked me to. The month before the ambush was not defined by shouting matches or slammed doors. It was defined by a quiet, creeping rot that I was too close to see until the floorboards gave way. It started with the silence. Evan, who used to text me a dozen times a day about everything from a funny license plate he saw to what he wanted for dinner, suddenly went radio silent during work hours. When he came home, his phone was always face down on the counter. If it buzzed, he would snatch it up with a reflex speed that made me jump. Muttering about work emergencies and the guys needing him for a crisis at the site, the garage meetings became nightly rituals. I would hear the low rumble of their voices from the driveway, distinct but unintelligible, like the hum of a generator that never turned off. When I asked what was wrong, Evan would sigh, rubbing his temples with a theatrical exhaustion. "It is just the supply chain," he would say. "You would not understand the logistics. Loose, it is a mess." Then the financial glitches started. It began with a utility bill. I was meticulous about our finances. I had a spreadsheet. I had reminders. Yet, a pink notice arrived in the mail stating our gas bill was 2 months overdue. I stared at the paper, knowing for a fact I had scheduled the payment. When I logged into the bank portal to check the transaction history, a red banner flashed across the top of the screen. Insufficient funds. My stomach dropped. There should have been $3,000 in that checking account. Instead, the balance read $42. I called Evan immediately, panic making my voice shrill. He answered on the first ring, calm and steady. "Relax, Lucy," he said. "I moved the money to the LLC operating account to cover a vendor. I forgot to tell you. I will transfer it back tomorrow morning. It is just a temporary cash flow thing." He sounded so reasonable. He sounded like a businessman handling big, important things while I fretted over a gas bill. I felt foolish. I apologized for overreacting. That night, he came home with takeout from my favorite Thai place and a bouquet of lilies. He was sweet, attentive, and charming. He massaged my shoulders while I ate pad thai, telling me how hard he was working to build our future, how he wanted to retire me early so I could start my own event firm. "By the way," he said casually, wiping his mouth with a napkin, "I need you to sign this rider for the insurance. Since I moved that cash around, the bank just needs a signature to verify we are still liquid." He slid a single sheet of paper across the quartz countertop. It was dense with text, but he had his hand resting over the top paragraph, his finger tapping the line for my signature, just right there. He said, I hesitated. The memory of the zero balance was still fresh. "Evan, maybe I should read it first." He laughed. A short, sharp sound. "Lucy, come on. It is standard boilerplate. If you do not sign it tonight, the vendor does not get paid, and the whole project stalls. Do you want to be the reason we lose a month of work?" I did not want to be the problem. I wanted to be the partner. So I picked up the pen and signed. The pattern repeated itself 3 times that month. A crisis would appear. A declined card at the grocery store. A missing transfer. A scary letter from a creditor. And Evan would swoop in with a logical explanation and a solution that inevitably required my signature. He was managing the chaos, or so I thought. In reality, he was manufacturing it. The turning point happened at a birthday party for Grant's wife. It was a backyard affair, strung with bistro lights and filled with the kind of loud, performative laughter that happens when people have had too much tequila. I was carrying a tray of lime wedges toward the bar when I saw Miles Pennington and Grant standing near the fire pit. Their backs were to me. I slowed down, not wanting to interrupt. And that was when I heard Miles speak. His voice was low, slurring slightly. "Man, she's going to flip when the letter drops." Grant took a swig of his beer and shrugged. "Let her flip. Once she signs the indemnity on the house, we are clean. It is airtight." I froze. The lime wedges rattled on the tray. "Once she signs," I stepped forward, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Who is going to flip? Miles?" They both spun around. The look on Grant's face was instantaneous, a mask of friendly confusion sliding over the panic. "Lucy!" Grant boomed. "We were just talking about a tenant dispute. Nothing you need to worry about." Miles looked down at his shoes, unable to meet my eyes. The silence that followed was heavy, sticky with lies. Later that evening, the narrative shifted. I was sitting at a patio table with a group of wives when Evan walked over, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. He squeezed a little too hard. "Lucy looks tired." "Doesn't she?" he announced to the group. "She has been so emotional lately. I think the stress of her job is getting to her. She is buying things we do not need, forgetting to pay bills. I have had to take over everything just to keep the lights on." The women looked at me with pity. "Oh, Lucy," one of them said, "you really need to take care of yourself." I tried to pull away, my face burning. "That is not true. Evan, I didn't forget to pay the bills. You moved the money." Evan laughed, kissing the top of my head. "See? Paranoia. It is okay. Babe, we all have bad months." I felt a scream building in my throat, but I swallowed it. If I yelled, I would prove him right. I would be the emotional, unstable wife he was painting me to be. On the drive home, I tried to confront him. I asked him what Miles meant by airtight. I asked him why he was lying to our friends about my spending. Evan slammed his hand on the steering wheel, making me jump. "Why are you always so suspicious? I am busting my back for us. And you are hunting for conspiracies. You are ungrateful. Lucy, that is your problem." He didn't speak to me for 2 days after that. He punished me with silence, making me feel small and crazy. I finally broke down and called Tessa. We met for lunch, and I poured it all out. The overdrafts, the signatures, the comment by the fire pit. Tessa listened, her face grim. She did not tell me I was crazy. She did not tell me to trust my husband. "Check your credit, Lucy," she said. "Tonight, do not tell him. Just check it." I tried to laugh it off. "Tessa, he is my husband, not an identity thief." Tessa reached across the table and gripped my hand. "He is acting like a man who is clearing the decks. Check your credit." I could not sleep that night. Evan was snoring beside me, a sound that used to comfort me but now sounded like the growl of a stranger. At 3 a.m, I slipped out of bed and took my laptop to the guest room. My hands were shaking as I typed in my social security number on the credit bureau's website. The report loaded slowly, a spinning wheel that felt like a countdown. When the page refreshed, I stopped breathing. Under the section for recent inquiries, there was a hard pull from a commercial lender I had never heard of, dated 4 days ago, and below that, under open accounts, there was a new line item, a credit card opened in my name 2 weeks ago. The balance was already $14,000. I sat there in the dark, the blue light of the screen illuminating a truth I could no longer deny. I had not authorized that card. I had not applied for that loan. I looked at the closed door of the bedroom where Evan lay sleeping. He was not just bad with money. He was not just stressed. He was systematically dismantling my financial identity and using the pieces to build a lifeboat for himself. The feeling that washed over me was not just fear. It was a profound violation. It felt as if I were walking through my own house and realizing that someone had been quietly moving the furniture while I was still sitting on it, preparing to empty the rooms before I even knew I was being evicted. The memory of that late-night credit check dissolved, replaced instantly by the harsh reality of the living room lights. I was back in the ambush, staring at the folder that sat on the coffee table like a loaded weapon. The air in the room felt thin, sucked dry by the four men staring at me. Waiting for my capitulation, I reached out, not to pick up the pen, but to close the folder. The sound of the heavy cardstock slapping shut echoed in the silence. "I am not signing this," I said. My voice was steady, surprising even me. "I am going to take this to an attorney. I will have them review everything, and then we can talk." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Evan's face, which had been arranged in a mask of sorrowful resignation, hardened instantly. The edges of his mouth turned down, and his eyes lost their performative shine. "There is no need for that, Lucy." Evan snapped. His tone was sharp, slicing through the polite fiction he had been maintaining for the camera. "We have already done the math. It is fair. It is more than fair. You are walking away with no debt if you sign now. If you drag this out, you are walking away with nothing." Grant Rourke leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. He swirled the remaining beer in his bottle, watching the vortex of amber liquid. "We have a lawyer on standby." "Actually," Grant said, his voice casual, "he can drive over right now to notarize it if you are worried about the formalities. He has already drafted the filing. It is a turnkey operation. Lucy, do not complicate it." I looked at Grant, then at Evan. A lawyer on standby? At 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night? It was obvious this was not a neutral third party. This was their lawyer, paid for by the LLC, designed to represent their interests while pretending to mediate mine. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but I locked my knees to keep from trembling. "I am not using your lawyer, Grant, and I'm not signing a settlement based on numbers I have never seen before. I am the one who manages the household finances. Evan, I know exactly what we have." Evan laughed. It was a cruel, dismissive sound that made my skin crawl. "You think you manage the finances," he said, shaking his head. "You manage the groceries. Lucy, you do not manage the assets. You do not contribute like I do." I felt a flush of heat rise up my neck. "Excuse me? I paid the down payment on this house. My grandmother's inheritance paid for the roof over your head. Evan." Evan exchanged a look with Miles Pennington. Miles smirked, looking down at his socks. "Not on paper you didn't," Evan said softly. The room spun slightly. "What are you talking about?" Miles cleared his throat. He looked bored, as if he were explaining a simple concept to a slow child. "The postnup covers the initial equity," Miles said. "It reclassifies the down payment as a marital gift to the primary earner. It is pretty standard language." I stared at him. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Postnup?" I whispered. "We never signed a postnup." Evan's eyes widened slightly. A flicker of warning directed at Miles. But it was too late. The card was on the table. "Of course we did," Evan said, recovering quickly. He reached for the folder I had just closed and flipped it open to the back. Past the settlement agreement. Past the debt allocation. He pulled out a document I had never seen before. It was titled Post-Marital Asset Agreement, dated 3 years ago. "You probably forgot," Evan said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You were very stressed that year. You signed it right here on this table." He pointed to the bottom of the page. There, in blue ink, was a signature. "Lucy Fox Carter." I leaned in, my breath catching in my throat. I looked at the letters. I looked at the slant of the L and the loop of the Y. It looked like my handwriting. It looked terrifyingly like my handwriting, but the pressure was wrong. The loop on the Y was too wide. I have a hitch in my signature. A tiny pause I make before crossing the T, a habit from grade school. This signature flowed perfectly, smoothly, without a single hesitation. It was a forgery, a high-quality, practiced forgery, but a forgery nonetheless. I looked up at Evan. He was watching me closely, his eyes searching mine for fear. He wanted to see me break. He wanted me to scream that it was a lie so he could point to the camera and say, "See? She is hysterical. She is denying her own signature." I did not scream. I did not cry. I went cold. "This is not my signature." I said. Evan leaned in, invading my personal space until I could smell the stale beer and the minty tang of his toothpaste. He lowered his voice so that the microphone on the bookshelf might not catch the words, but I heard them clearly. Do not fight this, Lucy. You will lose. We planned for every move. We have the paper. We have the witnesses. Just sign the settlement, and you can leave with your dignity. Fight us, and we will bury you under so much legal paper you will never breathe again. I looked at the four men, my husband, his friends, the garage brothers. They sat there in my living room, in the house my grandmother paid for, wearing their socks and drinking their beer. Confident that they had checkmated me, they thought they were the jury, the judge, and the executioner. I realized then that arguing was useless. Words meant nothing to men who manufactured their own reality. I took a step back, then another. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Evan flinched, perhaps expecting me to start recording him back, or to call the police. Who are you calling? He demanded, his voice sharpening again. I did not answer him. I unlocked the screen and tapped the favorites list. I pressed the icon for Tessa Lane. I put the phone to my ear. It rang once, twice. Tessa, I said, my voice flat and calm. I need you to come pick me up, now. I did not wait for her to ask questions. I hung up. I looked at Evan one last time. I did not say goodbye. I did not ask him how he could do this. I simply turned around and walked toward the hallway. As I passed the pile of shoes by the door, the loafers, the sneakers, the symbols of their invasion, I heard Miles speak behind me. She will be back by morning, Miles said, his voice muffled by a mouthful of beer. She has nowhere else to go. I opened the front door and stepped out into the cool night air. I closed the door behind me, shutting out the light, the camera, and the lies. They truly believed I was predictable. They thought I was the same woman who signed papers without reading them, the woman who made potato salad and stayed quiet. They thought I would come back because I was afraid. But as I stood on the porch, waiting for Tessa's headlights to cut through the darkness, I knew they were wrong. I was not coming back by morning, and when I did come back, I would not be the defendant in their courtroom. I would be the prosecution. I spent the first night on Tessa's beige sectional sofa, shaking so hard that my teeth actually clicked together. It was a physical reaction to shock, a biological rejection of the reality I had just walked away from. But when the sun came up, hitting the unfamiliar angles of Tessa's living room, the shaking stopped. I woke up with a headache that felt like a cleaver in my skull. But my mind was terrifyingly clear. The weeping wife had stayed on the couch. The woman who sat up and reached for her laptop was someone else entirely. I did not make coffee. I did not shower. I sat at Tessa's kitchen table and logged into a credit monitoring service. I paid the $40 fee for an expedited, comprehensive forensic report. When the PDF loaded, it was 18 pages long. I scrolled past the mortgage, past the car lease, and then I hit the wall. Listed under commercial liability, there was a revolving credit line for $250,000. The primary borrower was Garage Brothers Holdings, LLC. The guarantor was Lucy Fox Carter. I stared at the screen. $250,000. I had never signed a guarantee for $250,000. I had never even stepped foot in the offices of Garage Brothers Holdings. Yet there was my name, tethering me to a debt that could swallow my entire existence. By 10 o'clock that morning, I was sitting in the office of Raina Mercer. Tessa had found her. Raina was not the kind of lawyer who advertised on billboards. She was the kind of lawyer you heard about in whispers, usually from women who had walked into her office as victims and walked out as owners. She was a small woman with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and eyes that looked like they could cut glass. She read the credit report in silence. She read the settlement offer I had refused to sign. I had managed to snap a photo of the debt page before closing the folder. She took off her glasses and looked at me. "This is not a divorce, Lucy," Raina said. Her voice was dry, devoid of any comforting sugar. "This is containment." I blinked. "Containment?" She tapped the credit report with a manicured fingernail. "Your husband is not trying to leave you because he fell out of love. He is trying to leave you because the ship is sinking, and he needs someone to chain to the hull. He is trying to contain the damage of a failed business venture by dumping the liability onto your balance sheet before the creditors come calling. She leaned back in her chair. If you had signed that paper last night, you would have assumed full legal responsibility for that $250,000 debt. He would have walked away with the assets, and you would have been left with the wreckage. I felt the bile rise in my throat. But the postnup. I said, he produced a postnup. He said I signed it. Raina waved a hand dismissively. A forgery. And a lazy one, if they are springing it on you in a living room ambush without counsel present. But that is not what worries me. What worries me is the coordination. She leaned forward, her intensity pinning me to the chair. Listen to me closely. You are done talking to him. You are done texting him. You answer no calls. From this moment on, every single interaction happens in writing. If he wants to tell you the sky is blue, he sends an email. If he wants to ask how you are, he speaks to me. Do you understand? I nodded. I understand. Raina sent me back to Tessa's with a list of tasks. I was to become a forensic archaeologist of my own marriage. I started with the bank accounts. I downloaded 5 years of statements from our joint checking account. I sat there for 6 hours, highlighting every transaction that looked benign but felt wrong. I found them, transfers of $400 here, $600 there. They were labeled home maintenance or contractor service. But when I cross-referenced the dates, we had not had any maintenance done, no plumbers, no electricians. I traced the routing numbers. The money had not gone to contractors. It had gone to an account at a regional bank. I did not have access to that account, but I knew who did. The transfers were structured carefully, always under the $1,000 threshold that might trigger an automatic fraud alert text to my phone. It was a slow, deliberate siphon. He had been bleeding us dry for 3 years, teaspoon by teaspoon. Then I went to the emails. Evan had always used my email for overflow. As he called it, he would forward documents to me to print. Because our home printer connected better to my laptop, I searched his name. I searched the word attachment. Hundreds of results popped up. Most were irrelevant. But then I saw a thread from 2 years ago. The subject line was blank. The attachment was titled final_final 2.pdf. I remembered this day. Evan had called me from the road, frantic, asking me to print a document for him to sign when he got home. He had told me not to worry about what it was, just some compliance nonsense for the state. I opened the PDF. It was an operating agreement for the LLC. I scrolled down to the indemnity clause. The guarantor agrees to secure all credit extensions personally, and there, in the digital margin, was a note made in the editing software. A comment bubble left by a user named Grork. Make sure Lucy is listed here. We need her credit score to carry the float. I stared at the screen. Grant Rourke. They had not just tricked me, they had discussed me like livestock. I was not a partner. I was a credit score to carry the float. A sudden realization hit me, sharp and cold. The phone recording. Why had they recorded the ambush? Evan had said I was unstable. He wanted to prove I was crazy, but that did not make sense. If I was crazy, a judge might grant me sympathy. No, they did not want to record my rage. They wanted to record my refusal. If I had refused to sign a generous offer, an offer that, on the surface, looked like a clean split, they could present that video in court. They could say, "Look, Your Honor, we tried to be amicable. We offered her a settlement. She refused. She is being difficult. She is obstructing the process." They were building a narrative where I was the unreasonable party, forcing them to fight. They needed me to look like the villain so they could justify the legal war they were about to launch. I grabbed my phone and called Raina. "File it." I said, "File everything." Raina did not ask for clarification. We had discussed the nuclear option. Within 2 hours, Raina had filed emergency motions in the family court. We filed for a temporary financial restraining order, freezing all marital assets. We filed a lis pendens on the house, preventing any sale or transfer. We filed preservation requests for all digital evidence, including the metadata of the LLC's internal communications. It was an aggressive, hostile maneuver. It was a declaration of war. Late that night, my phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. It was a text from Evan. "You are embarrassing yourself." I stared at the words. He was not asking where I was. He was not asking if I was okay. He was not apologizing for the ambush or the forgery. "You are embarrassing yourself." He was trying to shame me. He was trying to make me feel small, to make me feel like I was making a scene. And that was when I finally understood the true nature of the man I had married. He was not scared of losing me. He had already discarded me years ago. Trading me in for a credit line and the approval of his friends, he was scared of losing the story. He was terrified that the image of the successful businessman, the good guy, the victim of an unstable wife, was about to shatter. I did not reply. I took a screenshot of the text, then I forwarded it to Raina. "Let him be embarrassed," I whispered to the empty room, "because I am just getting started." Raina Mercer sat behind her mahogany desk, her fingers steeped together like a church steeple. She looked at me with a gaze that suggested she had seen every variation of marital cruelty that exists in the state of Massachusetts. "We have hit them hard with the motions," Raina said. "Now, we change the weather. We need them to think the storm is over. We need them to think you are exhausted. Lucy." So, I stopped fighting. Or at least, I stopped looking like I was fighting. I sat down at my laptop in Tessa's guest room and typed an email to Evan. I deleted 3 drafts before I found the right tone. It had to be pathetic enough to feed his ego, but specific enough to be legally admissible. "Evan," I wrote, "I am staying at Tessa's. I am tired of the lawyers. I do not have the money to fight you on this, and I just want to move on. Please send me the itemized list of debts you mentioned. If we can agree on the numbers, I am open to settling quickly." I hit send. Then I waited. The reaction was almost immediate. It was like watching a group of high school bullies relax once the teacher left the room. The tone of Evan's texts shifted from hostile to patronizingly sweet. He sent me a spreadsheet within an hour, accompanied by a message saying he was glad I was finally being rational. But the real slip-ups came from the Garage Brothers. Because I was still logged into Evan's old iPad, which he had forgotten I had access to, I could see the iMessage notifications popping up from their group chat. "She folded." Miles texted, "I told you. She doesn't have the stomach for court. Get her to sign the liability transfer before the end of the quarter." Grant replied, "We need that credit line clear for the new build." They were celebrating, they were boasting, and in their arrogance. They were handing me the roadmap to their own destruction, while they were high-fiving each other digitally. I was meeting with Caleb Sutter. Caleb was a forensic accountant Raina had brought in. He looked like a man who found excitement in tax codes. Balding, wearing a beige cardigan, and speaking in a voice so soft I had to lean in to hear him. But what he found was loud. He spread a series of flowcharts across Raina's conference table. "It is a classic bleed-out," Caleb said, pointing to a series of red arrows. "The LLC is not just losing money. Lucy, it is hemorrhaging it. They have been using new credit extensions to pay off the interest on old loans. It is structurally similar to a Ponzi scheme, but without the investors, they are just shuffling debt between shell accounts." He tapped a circle labeled Carter Household. "Here is the problem," he continued. "They have tapped out their own credit. They have tapped out the business credit. The only fresh vein of credit left was you. Your credit score is pristine. Your debt-to-income ratio is low." I stared at the chart. It finally made sense. The divorce was not about me being unstable. It was not even about another woman. Necessarily, it was a harvest. They needed to harvest my creditworthiness to plug the holes in their sinking ship. The plan was to dump the toxic debt, about $400,000 of it, by Caleb's estimate, onto me as part of the divorce settlement. Claiming it was marital lifestyle spending, while Evan kept the hard assets, they wanted to cut the anchor loose, but they wanted to tie the anchor to my ankle first. But then Caleb pointed to something else, a property deed. "Evan claims the house is fully marital property," Caleb said. "He is claiming he paid the mortgage, So he owns the equity, but I found the trace on the down payment. I nodded. It was $80,000. From my grandmother. Correct, Caleb said. But it did not go from your grandmother to you. It went from your grandmother's estate into a trust, and then the trust wired the money directly to the escrow company. I looked at him, not understanding the distinction. It means, Caleb said, allowing a tiny predatory smile to touch his lips, that the down payment never commingled with marital funds. It is a separate property asset protected by trust law. Evan can claim whatever he wants about a postnup, but he cannot override the terms of a third-party trust with a forged signature. That $80,000, plus the appreciation on it, is untouchable. It gives you about 60% leverage on the home equity. I felt a spark of triumph. Evan thought he was the king of the castle. He did not realize he was living in a house that belonged, legally, to the memory of my grandmother. That afternoon, energized by the news, I went back to the digital dig. I was scrolling through the phone bill records. Boring. Tedious work. When I noticed a pattern, there was a second line on our family plan. It was listed as iPad data, which seemed normal. We had an iPad, but looking at the usage logs, this device was sending and receiving texts. iPads do not send SMS texts unless they are linked to an iPhone, and the volume was high. 50 texts a day, late at night. I traced the number the device was texting most frequently. It was saved in the logs under the name Luigi's Pizza. I frowned. Evan loved pizza, but he did not text a pizza place at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. I ran the number through a reverse lookup tool. It did not belong to a pizzeria. It belonged to a burner phone app, a voice-over IP service that masked the user's identity. I did not call the number. I did not scream at Evan. The old Lucy might have demanded an explanation. The new Lucy took screenshots. I downloaded the usage logs. I highlighted the timestamps that correlated with the times he told me he was working later at the gym. I sent the file to Raina with a note. Chain of custody, preservation of evidence, possible alienation of affection or conspiracy connection. I was building a wall of bricks, one fact at a time. 2 days after I sent the I surrender email, Evan reached out. We need to talk. He texted, come over to the house tonight. I will order dinner. We can sign the papers and be done with this. Just us. Like adults. I looked at the phone. Like adults. He was using the same shaming language he had used in the ambush. He wanted me back in that living room. He wanted me back in the space where he controlled the lighting, the locks, and the recording devices. I typed my reply carefully. I agree we should talk, but I'm not coming to the house. I am staying with Tessa. We can meet at the Starbucks on 4th and Main. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. The response took 5 minutes to arrive. The delay told me everything. He was angry. He was calculating. Lucy, don't be ridiculous. He wrote back, it's our house. It's private. I'm not discussing our marriage in a coffee shop. I smiled. It wasn't about privacy. If he cared about privacy, he wouldn't have invited an audience to our breakup. It was about control. Then we don't talk. I replied, 4th and Main, or I speak through my lawyer. He did not reply. He refused to meet me on neutral ground, and that was a victory in itself. It confirmed that without his stage, without his props, and without his backup dancers, Evan Carter was terrified of me. He needed the home court advantage because he knew that on a level playing field, he could not win. If silence was my weapon, noise was theirs. When Evan realized I was not going to meet him at the coffee shop and that I was not coming back to the house to be bullied into submission, he changed tactics. He decided that if he could not control me, he would destroy the version of me that existed in the minds of everyone we knew. It started with the digital whispers. I would open social media to find vague, melancholy posts from Evan about loyalty and how hard it is when someone you love loses their way. He never named me, but he did not have to. The comment sections were filled with our mutual friends offering prayers and support. Then came the text messages to me. People I had known for 5 years, wives of the Garage Brothers and neighbors, started reaching out. Hey, Lucy, Just checking in. Evan says you are having a really hard time right now. Let me know if you need to talk. They were not checking in. They were digging for information. They wanted to know if the rumors were true, that I was having a breakdown, that I was unstable, that I had abandoned my marriage because of some internal crisis. I deleted the messages without replying. I knew that any defense I mounted would just look like hysteria. But then the campaign moved from the personal to the professional, and that was when I felt the first real flicker of fear. I was sitting at my desk at Harbor Light Civic Events, reviewing catering contracts for the autumn gala, when my boss, David, asked to see me. David was a kind man, usually prone to rambling stories about his grandchildren, but when I walked into his office, he did not offer me a seat. He was standing behind his desk, looking at a printout. "Lucy, we received an email this morning," David said, his voice tight. It was anonymous. "The sender claims to have information regarding financial misconduct involving your personal accounts and suggests it might bleed into your management of our vendor budgets." My stomach dropped to the floor. Financial misconduct. The phrase hung in the air like a poisonous gas. "David, that is absurd," I said, gripping the back of the chair to steady myself. "You know how meticulous I am." "I know." "Lucy," he said, and his eyes softened slightly. But the email attached a redacted credit report showing significant defaulted debt. "It puts us in a difficult liability position. I have to ask you to step away from the financial approvals for the gala until this is cleared up." I walked out of his office with my face burning. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. They were trying to starve me out. They knew I needed my salary to pay Raina. If they cut off my income, they cut off my defense. I left work early and drove straight to Raina's office. I was shaking again, not from shock this time, but from rage. "This is illegal, isn't it?" I asked, pacing the length of her conference room. "They can't just slander me to my employer." Raina sat calmly, watching me pace. "It is defamation, yes. But proving it was Evan or his friends behind an anonymous Proton Mail account will take time we do not have. This is a siege tactic. Lucy, they want you to panic. They want you to feel like the walls are closing in so that you will call Evan and beg for it to stop. Desperate people sign bad deals." She slid a document across the table. "Speaking of desperate, this arrived at your old address today." The mail forwarding sent it to Tessa's. It was a letter on heavy bond paper, looking very official. The header read, "Regional Asset Recovery Services." It stated that I was personally liable for $112,000 of immediate debt related to the LLC, and that failure to pay within 7 days would result in wage garnishment and asset seizure. I looked at the number. $112,000. "This looks real," I said, my voice trembling. "It is designed to look real," Raina said, "but look at the address of the recovery firm." I Googled it. It was a P.O. box in a strip mall 3 towns over. "It is a scare tactic," Raina said, "a fake demand letter to terrorize you into signing Evan's settlement, which I assume promises to make this scary debt go away." Then the door opened, and Caleb Sutter walked in. He looked tired. He had bags under his eyes, but he was holding a tablet like it was a holy relic. "I found something better than a fake letter," Caleb said. He placed the tablet in front of me. On the screen was a digital copy of a loan modification agreement for the LLC, dated 6 months ago. My signature was at the bottom. "Look at the pixels," Caleb said, zooming in until the ink turned into jagged blocks of black and gray. I squinted. Around the edges of my signature, there was a faint, almost invisible halo of white pixelation that did not match the background grain of the paper. "It is a Frankenstein signature," Caleb explained. "He took a high-resolution scan of your signature from a legitimate document, probably that insurance rider you signed, and he lifted it. Then he digitally pasted it onto this loan document. It is a cut-and-paste job, and he did it poorly. When he converted the file to a PDF, he didn't flatten the layers correctly. The metadata still shows the insertion point." I stared at the screen. My signature, my name, stolen and pasted onto a lie. "This proves fraud," I said. "This proves forgery," Raina corrected. "And it gives us the hammer." Raina moved fast. That afternoon, she filed a motion to subpoena the original metadata for every single document the LLC had produced in the last 2 years. She also filed a notice of intent to hire a digital forensics expert to examine Evan's devices. The reaction was instantaneous. 2 hours after the filing hit the court docket, my phone rang. It was an email from Evan. The subject line read, "Settlement offer. Time sensitive." I opened it. The tone was completely different. Gone was the aggression. Gone was the shaming. "Lucy, let's stop the bleeding. The lawyers are the only ones winning here. I am willing to offer you a lump sum of $50,000 and full ownership of your car. I will absorb the LLC debts. We can sign this tomorrow and walk away, friends. $50,000. He was trying to buy my silence. He was terrified that a forensic expert was going to get a hold of his hard drive. Raina read the email and smiled. It was a shark smile. "He is flinching," she said. "He knows we found the bodies. Accept the mediation." She told me, "Tell him you are tired. Tell him you just want peace. Make him think you're taking the off-ramp. We need him to lower his guard so he doesn't start destroying evidence before the subpoena lands." So I replied. I typed the words that tasted like ash in my mouth. "Evan, I am tired. I just want this over. I agree to mediation. Let's meet next week and finalize it." I could almost hear his sigh of relief across the city. He sent back a thumbs-up emoji. He thought he had won. He thought the little woman had finally broken under the pressure of the rumors and the fake letters. I closed my laptop and leaned back. Feeling a strange exhaustion settled into my bones. I had survived the smear campaign. I had survived the financial terror. I was ready to end this. Then my phone buzzed with a new email notification. I glanced at it, expecting another message from Raina or perhaps a taunt from one of the wives. But the sender was not Raina, and the domain name was not Gmail. The sender was investigator. Miller, at State, May, Us. My breath caught in my throat. I opened the email. Ms. Fox Carter. My name is Detective Miller with the State Financial Crimes Division. We are conducting an active investigation into the lending practices of Garage Brothers Holdings, LLC. Your name appears as a primary guarantor on several instruments of interest. We would like to speak with you regarding your knowledge of these transactions. Please contact me immediately. I read the email twice, then a third time. The room went very quiet. The petty drama of the divorce, the rumors, the social freeze-out. It all suddenly felt very small. Evan and his friends were not just playing dirty in a divorce case. They were not just bad businessmen. I looked at the glowing screen, the state seal in the signature block looking back at me with unblinking authority. "Raina," I said. She looked up from her files. "What is it?" I turned the phone toward her. "I don't think we are dealing with a civil case anymore," I whispered. Raina read the email. Her eyes widened. I looked out the window at the darkening sky. I finally understood why they had been so desperate, why they needed the witnesses, why they needed to silence me so quickly. "So it wasn't just my marriage," I said, the realization settling over me like a cold shroud. It was a crime scene. The interrogation room at the State Financial Crimes Division was not like the ones on television. It was just a small, windowless conference room that smelled of stale coffee and copier toner. Detective Miller sat across from me, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. Raina sat next to me, her legal pad ready. "We have been tracking Garage Brothers Holdings for 18 months, Miller said. He slid a diagram across the metal table. It looked like a spider web, tangled and messy. We knew they were moving money between shell companies to inflate their assets and secure loans they could never repay. What we did not have was the leverage to get inside. Until you—" He tapped a photo of Evan on the diagram. Then he tapped a photo of Grant Rourke. "Here's the thing, Mrs. Carter," Miller said. "You probably think your husband is the leader of this group. He is the one with the big personality, right? The one who talks about the vision?" I nodded. "Evan always said it was his company." Miller shook his head. "Evan is not the leader. Evan is the face. He is the front man. Grant Rourke is the architect. Grant has a felony fraud conviction from 15 years ago in Nevada, under a different name. He cannot sign for loans. He cannot be the public face of a legitimate enterprise. So he needed someone clean. Someone who looked like the all-American husband. Someone like Evan. The air left my lungs. I looked at the photo of Grant, the man who had sat in my living room, drinking my beer, looking at me with such disdain. He wasn't just a loyal friend protecting Evan. He was the puppet master. And Evan, Miller continued, needed you. Because even Evan's credit wasn't enough to carry the weight of the debt Grant was racking up. They tapped you. Mrs. Carter, they married you for your FICO score. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The courtship, the charm, the way Evan had integrated me into the group but kept me on the periphery. It wasn't love. It was recruitment. I wasn't a wife. I was a co-signer with a pulse. When they said we have decided it is time to divorce you in your living room, Miller asked, did it feel like a personal decision? Or did it feel procedural? It felt operational. I whispered. Miller nodded. That is because it was. They had maxed you out. You were a credit card that had hit its limit. They needed to cut you loose so they could insulate the assets before the collapse. That is why they needed you to sign the debt allocation. They wanted to transfer the toxicity to you. Did you ever feel coerced? Miller asked. I thought back to that night. The 4 men, the shoes off, the blocked exit, the recording device, the threat to make it ugly. Yes, I said. I felt like I was on trial. I reached into my bag and pulled out the hard drive Raina and I had compiled. It contained everything. The timeline of the transfers, the screenshots of the texts, the metadata from the forged documents, the logs of the burner phone Evan used to communicate with Grant. Here, I said, sliding the drive across the table. This is how they did it. Miller took the drive. He did not smile, but his shoulders dropped an inch. This is exactly what we needed. I left the station feeling lighter, but the fear was replaced by a cold, sharp anger. I went back to Tessa's and went into surveillance mode. If the police were watching the money, I needed to watch the man. I still had access to our shared cloud account. Evan had changed the password for the bank, but he had forgotten about the cloud storage for our photos and documents. I saw that he had uploaded new files in a folder labeled Personal. I opened it. There were photos of items from our house listed on a marketplace app. My grandmother's antique credenza, the expensive espresso machine. He was selling things. He was liquidating. Then I saw a receipt. It was dated 4 months ago. U.S. Department of State, passport renewal, expedited service. I stared at the date. 4 months ago. That was 2 months before the ambush. That was while we were still hosting barbecues and sleeping in the same bed. He had paid an extra $60 to rush a passport renewal. He was not just planning to divorce me. He was planning to run. He was going to dump the debt on me, sign the papers, and disappear to a jurisdiction where Grant Rourke and the bank examiners could not find him. My phone rang. The screen flashed Evan. I hesitated, then answered. I put it on speaker so Raina, who was sitting across the kitchen island eating takeout, could hear. Lucy, Evan said. His voice was different. It was soft, ragged. It sounded like the man I used to love. I miss you. I said nothing. I let the silence stretch, forcing him to fill it. Look, this has gotten out of hand, he said. The lawyers, the threats. It is too much. I am tired of fighting. Luce, let us not destroy each other. I heard the tremor in his voice. It wasn't sorrow. It was panic. He knew the walls were closing in. He probably knew about the investigation, or at least suspected that the financing was collapsing. He needed me to sign. He needed the parachute. I want it to be over too. Evan, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Then meet me, he pleaded. One last time. We can work out a number. I will give you whatever you want. Just come home. I looked at Raina. She nodded. I am not coming to the house. Evan, I said, and I'm not meeting in a coffee shop. Where then? He asked. Anywhere. You name it. I knew exactly where. I knew that next Friday. Garage Brothers Holdings was hosting a launch party for their new development project. It was going to be a black tie event at the City Convention Center. Investors would be there, local politicians, the press. It was the night they were supposed to legitimize the fraud. The launch party. I said, "Next Friday." There was a pause. "The party?" "Lucy, that is a work event. It is going to be crowded. We cannot talk business there. It is the only place I feel safe." "Evan," I lied smoothly, "there will be people around. If you want to settle this, bring the papers to the gala. I will meet you by the Champagne Tower at 8 o'clock. If you do not agree, I will see you in court next year." He hesitated. He knew it was risky, but he was desperate. He needed my signature before the police knocked on his door. He thought he could charm me one last time in a tuxedo, surrounded by his success. "Okay," he said. "Okay, the party. I will see you there." I hung up. Raina looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You are walking into the lion's den," she said. "No," I said, standing up. "I am inviting the lions to a circus." He wanted to do this in front of an audience? Fine. I would give him the biggest audience in town. But this time, the witnesses wouldn't be his friends. They would be the people he was trying to con. And when the curtain fell, he wouldn't be the one taking a bow. The ballroom of the City Convention Center was draped in silver and blue. The corporate colors of Garage Brothers Holdings. It was designed to look like the future. There were ice sculptures carved into the shapes of skyscrapers and models holding trays of champagne who looked like they had been manufactured in a factory. The air smelled of expensive perfume and the distinct, metallic scent of desperate ambition. I stood at the top of the carpeted staircase. Looking down at the crowd, I was wearing a dress I had bought 3 years ago for a gala that Evan had canceled at the last minute. A floor-length sheath of midnight blue silk that fit like a second skin. I had spent an hour on my hair and makeup, not because I wanted to look beautiful for my husband, but because I wanted to look like armor. I wanted to look like a woman who owned the room, not a woman who was about to be evicted from it. I saw them immediately. Evan, Grant, and Miles were standing near the main stage, clustered together in a tight phalanx of black tuxedos. They were laughing too loudly, clapping investors on the back with a force that bordered on aggression. They looked like kings of a kingdom built on sand, completely unaware that the tide was coming in. I took a breath and descended the stairs. Evan spotted me when I was halfway across the room. His expression shifted instantly from performative confidence to genuine relief. He excused himself from a conversation with a local councilman and walked toward me, his arms slightly open. He thought I was there to surrender. He thought the dress was a peace offering, a sign that I wanted to be the trophy wife one last time before I signed the papers and disappeared. "Lucy," he said, reaching me. "You look stunning." He tried to kiss my cheek. I turned my head slightly, so his lips brushed the air near my ear. "Hello, Evan," I said. My voice was cool, carrying over the ambient jazz music. Grant Rourke materialized at his elbow. Grant looked tense. There was a sheen of sweat on his forehead that the dim lighting could not hide. He looked me up and down, assessing me not as a person, but as a solved problem. "Glad you made it, Lucy," Grant said. He put a hand on my shoulder, his grip heavy and possessive. "It is good to see you being reasonable. Just sign the papers in the office back there, and you can move on. We can all move on." He gestured vaguely toward a corridor behind the stage. The exit strategy. I did not move toward the corridor. Instead, I took a step back. Creating space between us, I let my voice rise, projecting it just enough so that the group of potential investors standing 5 feet away could hear. "I have a question." "Grant," I said. Grant's smile faltered. "Now isn't the time for questions. Sweetie, let's go to the back." I ignored him. I looked directly at Evan, then at Grant, and then at the investors who had turned to watch. "Why did you say you decided to divorce me?" I asked. The words cut through the chatter like a dropped glass. Evan stiffened. His smile froze, turning into a rictus of panic. The phrase we decided was the slip that had started it all, the admission that my marriage was a corporate asset managed by a committee. Hearing it said aloud in a room full of people who thought they were investing in a legitimate business was his worst nightmare. "Lucy," Evan hissed, stepping into my personal space to block me from view. "Keep your voice down. You are making a scene." Miles Pennington, who had been hovering nearby, rushed over. He moved too fast, knocking into a waiter and sending a tray of empty flutes crashing to the floor. The sound of breaking glass silenced the nearby conversations completely. "She is just emotional," Miles stammered to the onlookers, his face flushing a deep crimson. "She has been having a hard time." I did not look at Miles. I kept my eyes on Evan. "I am not emotional." "Evan," I said clearly, "I am actually quite focused. I agreed to mediation." "Yes." "But I only agreed to it after my attorney filed motions to preserve all digital evidence and compel transparency on the LLC accounts." Evan's face drained of color. He knew what that meant. It meant I hadn't just been crying at Tessa's house. It meant I had been building a case. "What are you talking about?" Evan whispered. "We had a deal. You said you wanted peace. I do want peace," I replied. "But I found that peace requires truth." At that exact moment, the double doors at the entrance opened again. The crowd parted. Not for a celebrity, but for a presence that demanded space. Raina Mercer walked in. She was not wearing a gala gown. She was wearing a charcoal gray power suit that looked sharp enough to draw blood. Beside her was Caleb Sutter, holding a thick leather briefcase. They did not look like guests. They looked like auditors arriving at an execution. Evan followed my gaze. When he saw Raina, his knees actually buckled slightly. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep. "We are going to the back," he said, his voice shaking with a mix of rage and terror. "Now, before you ruin everything." He tried to pull me. I planted my feet. I did not struggle. I simply refused to move. "No," I said. "I am staying right here." People were staring openly now. The illusion of the happy, successful power couple was dissolving in real time. The investors were exchanging nervous glances. The photographers, sensing the shift in energy, had lowered their cameras, unsure if they were witnessing a domestic dispute or a corporate collapse. Evan let go of my arm. He looked around wildly, realizing he was losing control of the narrative. He pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. My purse vibrated. I looked down at the screen of my phone, which I was holding in my hand. "You are making a mistake." The text read, "If you do this, you get nothing." I looked up at him. He was staring at me, his eyes pleading, begging me to remember the woman I used to be, the one who signed without reading, the one who kept the secrets. I did not text him back. I just smiled. It was a genuine smile, the first one I had felt in weeks, because over his shoulder, through the glass doors of the main entrance, I saw the final guests arriving. 2 men in plain suits walked past the security checkpoint. They moved with a synchronized purpose that was unmistakable. One of them was Detective Miller. They were not stopping for champagne. They were not looking for the hors d'oeuvres. They were scanning the room, looking for the man in the tuxedo who had spent 6 years building a life on a foundation of stolen credit and forged signatures. Evan saw my eyes shift. He turned around slowly, following my gaze. The color did not just leave his face, it seemed to leave his entire body. He stood there, a hollow man in a rented suit, watching his own ending walk through the door. Grant saw them too. He dropped his drink. The glass shattered on the marble floor, but this time, nobody looked down. Everyone was looking at the 2 investigators who were walking straight toward the stage, straight toward the lie, straight toward us. The trap had snapped shut, and I was the only one holding the key. The music did not stop immediately. The jazz band played on, oblivious to the fact that the party was over. Detective Miller and his partner moved through the crowd with the kind of heavy, bureaucratic gravity that makes champagne taste flat. They did not unholster weapons. They did not shout. They simply walked up to Grant Rourke, who was still holding the stem of his broken glass, and stopped. "Mr. Rourke," Miller said. His voice was polite, the tone of a man asking for directions, but the words carried the weight of a sledgehammer. "We have some questions regarding the loan applications for Garage Brothers Holdings. specifically regarding the identity of the guarantors. Grant laughed. It was a wet, nervous sound. Gentlemen, this is a private event. Whatever misunderstanding you have, my legal team can clear it up in the morning. We are celebrating tonight. He tried to wave them off, treating the state investigators like overzealous parking attendants. It is not a misunderstanding. I stepped forward, moving out of Evan's shadow for the last time. I have been cooperating with the State Financial Crimes Division for 3 weeks. Grant, I gave them the bank records, I gave them the metadata from the forged loan modifications, and I gave them the burner phone logs. Evan looked at me. His face did not just pale, it disintegrated. The handsome, confident mask he had worn for 6 years fell away, leaving behind the terrified face of a child who realizes he has broken something he cannot fix. You what? Evan whispered. Raina Mercer stepped forward then. She did not look at Evan. She addressed the circle of investors and sponsors who had gathered around us. Sensing the blood in the water, my client has filed for emergency financial protection, Raina announced, her voice projecting clearly. We have submitted evidence of systemic fraud, coercion, and forgery. We have also subpoenaed the records of every transaction made by this LLC in the last 24 months. If you have money in this venture, I suggest you call your attorneys immediately. The room went deadly silent. The jazz band finally stopped playing. Caleb Sutter opened his briefcase. He did not pull out a gun. He pulled out a single, large chart and held it up. It is a simple mechanism, Caleb said, speaking to the room as if he were teaching a class. They routed the liabilities to Mrs. Carter using forged signatures and coerced guarantees. They routed the assets, the cash, the property titles, to offshore accounts controlled by Mr. Rourke. It was designed to collapse. The only variable was who would be left holding the debt, and they voted for Lucy. Evan looked around the room. He saw the investors backing away. He saw the photographers lowering their cameras, not wanting to document a crime scene. She is lying, Evan shouted. The desperation in his voice cracked like a whip. She is vindictive. She is just an unstable ex-wife trying to ruin me because I left her. She is hysterical. He pointed a shaking finger at me. I did not shout back. I did not cry. I simply reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. I had already paired it with the Bluetooth speaker system on the nearby podium. A little trick from my days as an event planner. I knew the codes. I am not hysterical. Evan, I said softly, and I am not the one who decided this. I pressed play. The sound of my living room filled the ballroom. It was crystal clear. We have decided it is time to divorce you. The voice was Evan's, cold, arrogant. Sign tonight like an adult, or we will make it ugly, because witnesses matter. The crowd listened to the recording of the ambush. They heard the cruelty. They heard the calculation. They heard 4 men cornering a woman in her own home, treating her like a disposable asset. When the recording ended, the silence in the ballroom was absolute. I looked at Grant. He was not smirking anymore. He was staring at Evan with pure hatred. You idiot. Grant hissed. You let her record us? And that was the moment Evan Carter finally understood. He looked at Grant, his best friend, his mentor, his leader, and saw the truth. Grant did not care about him. Grant had used him. Evan was the front man. The pretty face to distract the bank, the husband to secure the wife's credit. He was never the king. He was just a pawn who thought the crown was real. Detective Miller stepped between them. Mr. Carter, Mr. Rourke, I think we need to have this conversation downtown, Miller said. He placed a hand on Evan's elbow. It was not a suggestion. As the officers escorted them out, Evan looked back at me over his shoulder. He looked small. He looked like a stranger. I watched them go. I watched the Garage brothers dissolve into the back of a police cruiser, their brotherhood ending not with a bang, but with the click of handcuffs. The divorce proceeding that followed was not the war Evan had threatened. It was a surrender, with the fraud exposed and the criminal charges pending. Evan had no leverage. Raina handled it with surgical precision. The court cleared me of all fraudulent liability. The debts that had been pinned to my name were legally severed, reclassified as proceeds of criminal activity, which fell squarely on Evan and Grant. Because the down payment on the house had come from my grandmother's trust, and because Evan had tried to steal it with a forged postnup. The judge awarded the property to me in full. I also received a judgment for legal fees, citing the documented bad faith and coercion of the ambush. 3 months later, I stood on the porch of the Colonial. It was a Tuesday. I put the key in the lock. It was a new key. I had changed the locks the day after the party. I stepped inside. The house was quiet. The beige sectional was gone. I had sold it. The smell of stale beer was gone. The feeling of being watched, of being managed, of being voted on, was gone. I walked into the living room. It was empty, waiting for new furniture, waiting for a new life. I took a deep breath. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like ownership. They had sat in this room and tried to divorce me like a committee. They thought they could vote me out of my own existence. But they forgot that in the end, the only vote that mattered was the one cast by the truth. And all they had really done was hand me the pen I needed to write them out of the story forever. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment down below with your location and share your thoughts on Lucy's revenge. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Morgan Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so we can get this story out to even more listeners.